Good afternoon. It's Thursday, the 2nd of July 2015, just after 1 o'clock. And contrary to the screen, I am your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. Mike Robinson is with me in the studio, but he's behind the technical desk. And we're going to be joined by Mike West from Bastion Radio. So let's see whether Mike's there. Is the system working?
Hi, Brian. Yeah, see you nice and clear. How are you doing?
Yeah, good morning. Well, thanks very much for coming on. Of course, we've got some amazing events unfolding in UK at a national level, but also very much at a community social level. A massive police presence at the home of Tom Crawford. We've seen an attempt to evict Tom Crawford and his family on two previous occasions. But we had an alert early this morning that there was a massive presence of bailiffs with just unbelievable support from the Nottingham police. Now, before we get on to that, we'll just, as we always do, cover the weather. It's pretty grim here in Plymouth, quite hot and humid, but we've had a lot of heavy rain. I think it's the same in a lot of places across the country. RIL has got a quick statement in to say it's cloudy and smuggy in Norfolk. So we've got this humid weather at the moment. Well, let's go straight over to the situation in Nottingham. And Mike, you managed to pick up some images here of what's taking place on the streets.
Yeah, well, already the Nottingham Post has a few lines up. They seem to have rushed it out somewhat. I guess they're reacting to the police having to make a statement earlier. I phoned the police at about 10 o'clock this morning, or 10:30, and they made the following statement. If you could just, so there you go. There is a civil process being carried out at an address in Fern Close, Carlton, and we are in attendance to prevent any breach of the peace. Well, they seem to be pretty heavy attendance. So if we just go through a couple of these pictures, this is the beginning of it. We can see vans in the background there. And then we've got another one here, which shows people starting to turn up. And then the last one's a little less good quality, a bit less clear, but more people beginning to turn up. So word is getting out, and more people have turned out. And Mike, I understand that the bailiffs have already taken the property. Is that correct?
I spoke to Tom probably about an hour and a half ago now, and at that time he was about 7 minutes away from his property and is under the impression that the premise has been taken. I asked Tom, was there at any stage a notice issued of the eviction? It's my understanding that they need to give at least 12 days notice. Tom's adamant that they've had no notification at all. Spoke to Linda Taylor, who updated me and said that Tom requested the paperwork, the warrant or the possession order from the bailiffs direct when he actually got to the back to the premise, and they refused to show him any sort of paperwork.
Well, I mean, one question that needs to be asked straight away is who is actually funding this operation, because a police presence of that scale is not inexpensive. I mean, we know that the police have published, I don't know about Nottinghamshire Police, but other police forces around the country do have schedules published for the hiring of police for events. Normally this, I suppose, is for football events and other events of this type, but of course we've no evidence that mechanism hasn't been used in this case.
Well, it could be all behind the back door, couldn't it? I mean, if there's, from what my understanding is, there's one or two or possibly three bailiff firms involved in this. Obviously, the banks and the financial institutions that are desperate to see through these asset grabs have got a bottomless pit of money to pay these fees out. So it wouldn't surprise me if this has come via the bailiffs. And paid out as a private fee. Now, my question to Nottinghamshire Police is going to be the same as I did with Manchester Police. Where is this national policy that's meant to have been rolled out with police now assisting in civil enforcement? I mean, it's turning our police into civil enforcers. No consent from any of us. This is just more of the corporatisation of our police.
The police statement says that they're there to prevent a breach of the peace. Has there been any breach of the peace at either of the previous events? And of course, the answer to that is no.
No.
So So
if we look at the Moston eviction that happened 2 or 3 months ago in Greater Manchester, not only were the police, the TAU, Tactical Aid Unit, dispersed, part of their riot squad, they weren't just there to keep the peace, they actually partaken in breaking into the premise. They were the primary people that broke into the premise using the battering rams or the enforcement key or special key, whatever they like to term it. So it's not just police there being used to keep the peace. I think if the police hadn't have acted so unexpectedly here and turned up and people were there, I think we would have been looking at a different story. I think the police would have been assisting bailiffs to break and take the premise, as it were. I think they would have broke in. The police would have done it. We've certainly seen that with Greater Manchester Police.
Mike, one of the clues I think we get to what this police operation is about is that they've actually cordoned off the house. You mentioned to me earlier this morning that it was only residents that could get through that police cordon, and almost they're checking identity to see who live next. So the police have been, I believe, actively keeping the public away from the incident. So they're certainly not being unbiased.
Yeah, it's papers, please, isn't it? It's the same old story. It's the police state that everyone is denying that we're going into, or certainly not waking up to the fact that we're not going into, we are in a police state. And I can't reiterate that enough. And things are only going to get worse from here. They've been testing the ground for some time now. The corporatisation of our police service, and I emphasise that word, police service, is now being shown out for its real true colours. And this is what Common Purpose will call acting beyond authority. This is the real meaning of that term now. They've placed imbeciles into power that do not question the tasks that they're being given. They do not question them, they just carry them out because they're acting beyond their authority. And this is what's happening in our police services now, and it's got to be stopped. They're not to be used as civil enforcers as they are in this case.
Well, I think you're spot on with that, Mike. I just, as an ex-military man, and I know you're the same, I find it outrageous that when you think back to the time that you were there, thinking that you were serving your country, that you were certainly protecting the country, the public, friends and families, you were doing a job. While you were doing that, we had the police in Britain supposedly protecting our families at home.
Yeah.
Now we
Can
find...
I just add something there,
Yeah,
Brian?
certainly.
Sorry to interrupt. I just want to get this bit in. They've obviously been looking at Tom Crawford's social media feeds to find out when he's not going to be in the property, because they've chose the day that Tom was on his way to a High Court hearing in London to observe another case that's going on there. Not only that, Sue was left at home on her own when these bailiffs and police turned up. She's only just buried her mother in them circumstances. So, you know, this is all being done underhandedly. There's no notices been served. They're doing this, really, I'm trying to tame myself down here, Brian. They're doing this very underhandedly and in a criminal capacity. Nottinghamshire Police have got to answer for this. And, you know, they're assisting the illegal eviction here. It's quite clearly an illegal eviction. There's no judgment. Where's the judgment?
Yeah. Well, you've said it, the police, Nottinghamshire Police are assisting a criminal activity, but of course it's the same Nottingham Police that we've demonstrated are prepared to harass, bully, victimise, threaten and break into the homes of child abuse victims, single ladies on their own, terrified by the action of a police force. These people need to be brought to book. The Chief Constable of Nottinghamshire, in my view, should be brought in front of a court, and they've got to be made accountable for these actions. We've got some other topics in this news today talking about the sheer criminal intent of the British government, but you're absolutely right. We are now seeing this criminal power unleashed on Britain's streets, and the irony is, of course, that policemen and women are themselves going to be caught by this regime. They are helping create the prison state. But of course, the state is going to take the children of policemen and women just as much as it's going to take children from other families. So if there are any serving policemen and women watching this programme, we're going to say to you, I'm afraid you need to wake up pretty quickly. And the other thing I'll just add is that we recently posted an article saying that some of the mainstream press and media were waking up. And in that article, I referred to the fact that a couple of mainstream journalists were pointing out to me that journalists were being threatened when they tried to pursue stories. Who was threatening them? The police, warning them off with mutterings of harassment. So we've got Britain's police being run by a private organisation. It was a private company originally, ACPO. We've now got something rather more sinister, this Council of Police Chiefs. And who are they accountable to? Nobody. I know you're pretty fired up on this one, but you feel as well, I think, that it's time that people got out of those cosy armchairs and started to actually do something instead of watch it as if it's a video.
Oh, definitely, Brian. I mean, admittedly, over the last couple of weeks, I've took a slight backseat in things. As we see this all panning out, I can't put it across enough that people should really start questioning this now. Now, when I first looked into these cases where police are assisting bailiffs and at worst gaining access to these properties, I questioned the whole process. I spoke to Greater Manchester Police. Their press office admitted that this is now national policy. I asked for the framework and policy on this, and I didn't get one. I was then shafted off to the MPCC, yeah, that's right, yeah. And whatever they do, I don't know. They palmed me off to the College of Policing, and they promised to get back to me. They never did. This framework agreement, wherever it is, or this policy, exists verbally, from what I can see, and it seems to be it's been sent down from either government directly to the police to assist with these bailiffs' evictions. And there's just nothing in stone. You can't get this policy. You really can't get a hold of it. This is what's worrying to me. They're making it up as they go along. And again, I'll go back to that statement that you keep, you've made a big thing of, which is acting beyond authority. This is it. This is it. We're seeing it live now.
Yeah. Well, and we'll just also remind our viewers and listeners today that, of course, it's Michael Gove who has already said that he's going to be working to assist the government to opt out of freedom of information requests because the government needs to keep its secret information secret. We say, well, of course you do, because you're creating unlawful wars overseas and you're protecting paedophiles in Westminster. Well, happily, we think that Russia Today will pick up on the Tom Crawford story. Certainly, they've done that in the past. Of course, we have absolutely no faith in the BBC. But apparently, Mike has discovered that the BBC is having to shed a few jobs.
Well, they are shedding 1,000 jobs. And of course, they're blaming it on an £150 million shortfall as a result of less than expected income from the television license fee. Now, of course, this needs to be put in the context of the overall discussion of television licensing and how the BBC is funded. I think this is part and parcel of that discussion that they've decided to take this step. So we'll see how it pans out, because the rumours are that they're going to replace the television license. What was it they were calling it? A dwelling tax?
Can I give you an example, Mike?
Yes, go for it.
Yeah, here, look, this come this morning. Just show it up to the camera now. This come this morning, TV licensing. This is now my third year of refusing to pay it since the Jimmy Savile thing. I'm going to open it live on air now. This is my TV license demand that I get on a monthly basis. Official warning. This is official warning number 10. That's the best thing you can do with your TV license demands. Bin it.
Excellent.
Mike, I hope you're going to burn it afterwards because, of course, you'll reduce the dependence on fossil fuels if you do that. And if you help stop climate change, you get a personal letter from the Pope. So we can connect TV licensing to the Pope in one go.
Yeah, there you go. Right. Well, just to finish this off, Brian, just to put this in perspective, 1,000 people, there are 18,000 employees working for the BBC. So 1,000 is quite a large proportion of that. I don't think that the simpler, leaner BBC, as it's being called, is going to produce better news output. And I'll just mention that somebody said to me the other day, none of this stuff in this country could happen if journalists were doing their jobs. And of course, while that's particularly true of the BBC in a sense, in another sense it isn't, because the BBC's job is to provide the government line on what's going on in the world. So they are doing their jobs in that sense. But the overall point about journalists, I just want to broaden, because it's not just journalists that aren't doing their jobs. The general public, we are not doing our jobs either. And this comes back to Brian's point earlier about people getting out of their armchairs. We need to start doing our jobs and holding everybody to account, including the BBC. Withholding your television tax is one way of doing that, but there are many other ways as well. So maybe some pickets outside BBC offices might be a good thing to do.
Okay. Sorry, finger trouble there, brought that one in early. Well, let's have a look at what else the BBC's been up to. And here it is, because they've calmly said, well, we're working with Google to make sure we take information down from the internet. So this is Google that can't stop child pornography. It can't stop the vile pornography that pervades the internet. But now that people are starting to ask questions about who is doing what, all of a sudden that information's taken down. And the BBC proud to boast that it's working with Google in order to remove information from the public eye. And we've pointed out several times who else has been taking information down. Well, it's the North Koreans. So this is fairly standard for dictatorships. Make sure there's no information in front of the public. I just say what a disgusting organisation the BBC is. We still have no proper progress on the fact that paedophiles were clearly working within the BBC. But what is the BBC now doing? Commenting on the actions of the Met Police. And we'll come on to that shortly. But I think, Mike, you've got some information on Moody's here.
Well, this is Greece, really. So as expected, the Prime Minister of Greece, Tsipras, did say yesterday that he's hoping that everybody at the weekend will vote no against the EU, IMF, ECB plans. But this is Moody's here, who have now downgraded Greece once again from CAA3 to CAA2. The key driver for today's rating action is Moody's view that the probability of support continuing to be provided over the medium term has fallen since the assignment of the CAA2 rating in April, regardless of the outcome of Sunday's referendum. Moody's believes that without ongoing support from official creditors, Greece will default on its privately held debt. So they have downgraded Greece. That's great news, isn't it? But the Bank of England also saying today that they believe that this is an extremely dangerous situation. This is John Cunliffe, who's a deputy governor, and he said, we are not seeing signs of that. He's talking about major contagion around the world. We're not seeing signs of that at the moment. Financial markets are not showing there's contagion or spreading of those risks to the periphery. But he went on to say that it's a very volatile situation, a very fluid situation, and it's a very dangerous situation. And I think I mentioned yesterday the turn of phrase that might be applied to that kind of reporting. But nonetheless, the Greek situation continuing, and we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, dangerous times in Europe as a whole, and support to the people of Greece from the UK column. Till we deal with the criminal banks, of course, all of the criminal funding of these other activities is going to continue. With a little bit of treason by Britain's politicians, I think.
Yes, well, of course, at home, destroying the constitution for fun and profit seems to be the most likely pastime of just about every politician going. And Chris Grayling announcing today their plans for English votes for English MPs. But of course, as usual, it's going to be a complete mess. So what they're saying is that it looks like all MPs will vote on issues that only apply to England and Wales, and then there's going to be some kind of special panel which might make decisions on top of that. So it's a complete subversion of democracy, where you have a vote in Parliament, and that vote is basically ignored, and then a panel of MPs make a decision on what was decided in Parliament. It's an incredible situation. So they're going to change the way laws are made by changing the rules, knowing as standing orders to dictate how Parliament conducts its business, and it could become law by the time Parliament rises for its summer recess. So we'll keep an eye on that.
But they're clearly breaking Westminster down step by step. We've still got the refurbishments to look forward when they're going to have to decant the politicians to another city, Manchester, Birmingham, who knows.
Well, of course, you see, despite the fact that they're saying it's English votes for English MPs, the SNP still has to have a say, Brian.
Of course, a lot of power north of the border. I think we'll be hopefully covering that a bit more with David Scott tomorrow. But a few clues in where the real power is held. Thank you very much to Alex for sending us this. Have a look at parliament.uk. This was some questions being asked by Lord Stoddard to do with pupils' food. There was a lot more in the answer than meets the eye. Schools have, it says. Well, what did they say? Let's blow it up a bit. It says basically that schools have common law powers to search pupils with their consent for items. There's nothing to prevent schools having a policy of inspecting lunchboxes for food items that are prohibited under their school food policies. A member of staff may confiscate, keep or destroy such items found as a result of the search if it's reasonable to do so in the circumstances. It would be good practice for the pupil to be present during an inspection and for a second member of staff to be present if any items are to be confiscated. Now the key is there, it says schools have common law powers to search pupils with their consent. But I think there's some real twisting going on here, because although the government is admitting that common law is based on consent, they're trying to say that the power to take food away from children is part of common law, in my opinion. But Mike, I believe that you've got some personal experience of this very subject.
Yeah, only on Monday. My son, he's in year 3, he's 8, and in his lunchbox, he gets to pick what treat he wants, reasonably, for what he wants for his lunch. He has quite a healthy lunch, but he's obviously allowed a treat. He picked one of these small, it's a Ritz biscuit, and it's got a Cadbury's chocolate around the outside of it. That's all it was. He wanted one of those as his treat. The food supervisor, whatever they're calling them now, I don't think they call them dinner ladies, they've got some sort of title now, confiscated it from his lunchbox and said, "You're not allowed that." He come home quite upset, and I went back to the school with 2 of them bars this time, the next day on the Tuesday, confronted his teacher and said, under no circumstances does the school dictate what my son has for his lunch. He's not there for dietary advice. He's there to be educated and learn reading, writing, drawing, physical education and things like that. He's not obese, he's not overweight, there's no concern about his health. But as far as I'm concerned, the school is trying to dictate to us how we feed our son, and basically take the right of my son to have a treat in his lunchbox should he want one. Well, I've put them right on that, Brian, and I think if you confront this Hitler regime that's happening in the schools at the moment, they're giving children advice now. What they're saying is any drinks with sugar in, don't touch at all. What they are advising them to have is the low-calorie diet drinks, which are turning out to be more unhealthy than the ones with sugar in, because they contain things like aspartame, a cancer-causing chemical that's in these drinks. And in recent research, it's been shown that diet drinks are actually more fattening than the ones with sugar in. So I'm getting a bit tired from this new regime that's happened in our schools within the last couple of years. Certainly in the last year, they've been ramping up now, where they seem to be taking over the parents' control of their child and looking at things like their dietary needs above education. I just can't understand it, Brian. And one thing I have picked up on is that in primary schools, then the responsibility for the education now seems to be lying on the parent, that they're setting homework for these children now. And it's not homework for the children, it's homework for the parents to do.
Yeah. Well, of course, we've seen with the named person scheme in Scotland that ultimately the state is going to take total control of your children if we allow them. And whereas they've brought it in a pretty black and white sense north of the border. I think the aim south of the border is to drift in this state control of children. The phrase I hate is the nanny state, because of course the state doesn't intend to do any nannying. The state is going to take pretty vicious control. But let's move on a bit. The government's short of money, austerity, except where it comes to killing people, of course. And The Independent, surprisingly, has got quite a good article here pointing out that Britain is still arming Israel, despite the fear of weapons being used against Gaza. And in the text here, it says the government's been accused of ignoring its own evidence that British weaponry may have been used by Israel in its assault on Gaza last year, after fresh arms deals worth $4 million were approved by Britain within weeks of the conflict. So here's the reality of the British government. We can't feed people, we can't house people at home, we can't provide them with jobs. But if somebody wants to get involved in killing innocent men, women and children, then David Cameron's Conservative government is only too willing to help. Meanwhile, we're seeing that things are getting interesting as a result of the Tunisian killings. And as usual, UK Column has decided to wait a bit before having a look at what's going on. And we decided to pick up on this Independent story here. Tunisian jihadists hit list of targets over the summer revealed. So this is a pretty hard-hitting headline. If you start to read the article, it's full of fear. Tunisian jihadists linked to ISIS have drawn up a target list for the coming months that includes alcohol stores, bars, the country's main airport, the tourist resort island of Djerba, and the security forces. It goes on to talk about other things as well. And it says that investigation of ISIS-linked social media and internet forums has revealed a pattern of wide-ranging discussion of possible objectives. So this is quite remarkable. All this evidence is coming out of social media. Well, no, according to The Independent, there's something else. There were many warning signs. There'll be other attacks. And Mr. Gallen has been talking about this, a researcher at the Global Security Institute. So when you get deep into the text of this article, we've got another one of these institutions being quoted as if they are an informed source of intelligence information. So as we always do, UK Column started to dig, and my goodness, it's pretty easy. Here is the Global Security Institute. The About Us section on this website didn't work, but it was pretty easy for us to see what it is by having a look at the people. So let's just see if I can scroll down on that website to give you an idea of the sorts of people we're dealing with. I could encourage you to go and see it for yourself, but if this little video clip will run, should do in a second, you'll start to see a very long list of bankers, people that have been involved in rather interesting international firms, people who've been involved with the White House. Mikhail Gorbachev is involved. We've got a few previous heads of state. It goes on and on and on. And the little CVs, you say, well, what have these people actually done that means they know anything about world security at all? We haven't got into the funding yet. But isn't it remarkable that The Independent puts a whole fear-mongering story together based on these, well, who are they? Who are these people? Independent doesn't make any comment on them at all. What have we got on screen at the moment? We've got the Fred Foundation, whatever that is. But do have a look, because in amongst all of these beautiful people, we get on to a few heads of state. We've got a lot of legal people, we've got bankers, I think we've got a few token people, and then somewhere we'll see Mikhail Gorbachev pop up. I'll watch in silence actually, because I find this so amusing, and I'll give you the comment in 2 seconds. We're just about at the bottom. There he is. So these are all reliable, independent, highly experienced security people. No, they're not. So what The Independent's doing is spewing out somebody's propaganda, And what's the aim of the propaganda? Well, we're all going to be murdered in our beds as a result of so-called jihadist attacks. Personally, I don't believe a word of it. Mike, what's your thoughts?
Well, you know, it's not only The Independent that's played on this as well. If you've been listening to the BBC coverage of it over the last, near week, certainly the beginning of the week, BBC Radio 5 Live had the pleasure of having Chatham House spokesperson on there. And, you know, despite the fact of wanting to rip the radio out the dashboard of my car and throw it out the window, I've never heard so much twaddle in my life. Here we have a secret society of nobodies, just like them people you've listed off on that article you just had there. Who are these people? What are their experience? Chatham House, I mean, you know, they're not allowed to disclose the discussions they have in this so-called secret society. And here they are on the BBC advising us who ISIS are, how they're expanding out now, and let's expect attacks here on our own doorstep. You can see this panning out because we've had the Metropolitan Police already carrying out exercises in London now in order to train up for these attacks. Well, in my experience, every time the Met Police have had drills and training experience in London, something's happened, as it has around the rest of the globe, as we see the attacks in America, Spain, Norway, and across the globe with training drills taking place to be followed up by the real thing happening. All coincidence? I don't know.
Absolute total coincidence.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to continue to watch it. And of course, if you're watching UK column news from overseas, we're going to say it doesn't matter what overseas country you're residing in. We are looking out for you. And indeed, it's people living in Britain that are now suffering the emerging dictatorship.
Sorry, Brian, can I just add, just before you move on to the next subject, also interesting to note, back to our friends at the BBC, on Tuesday, Radio 5 Live again, were discussing the Tunisian case. This is what I find absolutely sickening and cannot get my head around at all. They were discussing with a holiday expert from ABTA on there, what's the possibility now of getting a cheap holiday in Tunisia now since this attack? And they were openly discussing having cheap holidays whilst they're preparing the bodies to fly them home the next day. Don't you find that a bit sick, or is it just me being a bit overcautious here and or cynical?
Well, I would say that if your agenda is to make sure that more British people die so that you can ramp up this created terrorist threat, you want more tourists to go over to Tunisia.
And they gave advice that don't bother going to Greece because of the financial situation there. So weigh the two things up there. Go to Tunisia because you can get a cheap holiday now because people have been massacred there. But don't bother with Greece because your money could be in trouble if you're out there. And it's not good advice to travel to Greece whilst this financial crisis is going on there. Don't you find it all ironic and sickening?
You've got me smiling now because you've put it over so well, Mike. It is obvious, isn't it? Here we've got the BBC pushing out the British government and the European Union propaganda. Let's crush Greece. By the same time, we want to make sure we get a few more bodies flown home by Tunisia so that we can blame all of the Islamic community for this outrageous state of the Middle East, which of course was caused by the efforts of Tony Blair and the USA, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron. Outrageous stuff.
Yeah.
Well, how bad does it get at home? We reported on the plight of Melanie Shaw. Melanie is extremely grateful that she was able to come on live with us and tell her story. And we know from the emails that we've had back that her harrowing story, told in her own words, has made a big impact on a lot of people. Now, of course, Melanie is not alone in any sense. There are thousands and thousands of victims like her. And we need to make sure that we're not just supporting Melanie. We're working to help everybody that's trying to fight to expose this absolutely vile government control of child abuse. Mickey Summers in particular doing a very good job in Nottingham, Bill Maloney in London. Keep at it, guys. But Melanie Shaw, just outrageous harassment and abuse by Nottinghamshire police. that, of course, are now on the streets to help private companies steal somebody's property. Well, Mike, you picked up that the police have run into a bit of trouble over their handling of abuse cases.
Well, this is Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary that have produced 3 reports on the issue. The first report is called In Harm's Way, the role of police in keeping children safe, and that they looked at 576 cases across England and Wales. 177 were found to have been dealt with well. 179 were considered adequate, and 220 were considered, so that's more than 33%, were viewed as inadequate. In the second report, which was called Online and on the Edge, Real Risks in the Virtual World into Online Abuse, they said that they looked at 100, so they found 124 of the case files examined, and this was across 6 constabularies. 52% of them were inadequate or needed improvement. But the spokesman for Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary said the old methods of policing, which relied on a target-driven approach, where what mattered was what was counted. An approach which still permeates policing today must be driven from the policing culture once and for all. And here's the key point that he wants to make: children must be placed at the heart of what policing does next. But the key thing is they need to look at a multi-agency approach. So what we see in this article is a further expansion of the multi-agency public protection arrangements that we saw, or at least the justification for the further expansion of that we were discussing in yesterday's programme. This requires, he said, a cultural shift away from largely reactive policing that targets acquisitive crime with success measured by crime statistics and conviction rates. It must be supported by all agencies that work with children, getting better at spotting signs of abuse, cruelty and neglect, and intervening early to prevent harm. Well, of course, what's really going on? He also said we have got to fundamentally change our approach to policing so that our absolute focus is on working proactively with other agencies to protect the public from harm committed on or offline. So it looks to me like the original target-driven approach for covering up child abuse isn't doing the job. Brian, they're a bit worried that it's getting out of hand and it's becoming too much in the public awareness, and they want to take a multi-agency approach to make sure the public are protected from this information.
Well, I'm sure you're spot on with that, Mike. And my view is that this is why Nottinghamshire Police are going for victims like Melanie Shaw, Mickey Summers and the others. They hold the evidence that the abuse is not just by odd groups of paedophile. This is orchestrated right through the system that claims it's there to protect children. And of course, that can only be happening if we've actually got senior people, we've got judges, we've got senior police, we've got politicians involved, not only in the abuse itself, but the cover-up. But have a look at the BBC here, this despicable organisation which did nothing to root out the Jimmy Savile, root out those who were protecting Jimmy Savile and his abuse. It likes nothing better to stir up the trouble. So we've got a very interesting situation here where we've got NSPCC's John Cameron being bigged up by the BBC. He's blaming the police for all of the abuse failings. Here's his criticism: 20th century policing in the 21st century. But we actually say, what on earth has NSPCC been doing? Because when we talk to people who've been very badly abused in the system and we ask them, well, did you go to NSPCC or did you go to some of these other big charities? They laugh. They absolutely laugh and say, why would you go to these charities? They're just as dangerous as going to a local authority children's home. So we're quite interested. But here's what the Met is up to. We've got the Met website not talking about how they're going to bring paedophiles to book. They're boasting that they're going to be featuring on a BBC One documentary. And I've described these as figures out of a spaghetti western We've got Bernard Hogan Howe pretending to be a cowboy, I think. He's not worried about policing. He's worried about self-promotion, that he's now become some form of film star. Well, here we go. Oh dear, we've got the Met Police commending NSPCC for involvement in Operation Yewtree. Well, that's remarkable, isn't it? Because we've now got NSPCC criticising the police. But why would NSPCC have been involved with the police in the first place, Mike?
Well, what they're trying to do, aren't they, is to reinforce this notion that what we need to do, because the police have been failing, they want to reinforce this notion that we need this multi-agency approach. And of course, the NSPCC undoubtedly would be one of the agencies involved.
Of course. Well, if I just add this bit or blow it up a bit, we've got the same Peter Wanless, NSPCC Chief Executive, accepting the commendation from the police. So we're watching utter nonsense in the public domain. We've got apparently the NSPCC criticising the police because they're not doing their jobs. But when the police want to give a commendation to NSPCC, they're falling over themselves to actually praise the police.
But isn't this exactly the point? We've got the multi-agency approach. They're protecting each other. They're looking out for each other. They're promoting each other in the right way at the right time to gain the overall policy that they need to gain. And this is a perfect demonstration of it. They're criticising in one news article. They're clapping each other in the backs on the next news article. And of course, when it actually comes to a real investigation, we have no idea of knowing where the conflicts of interest are.
Well, I think we're getting pretty close to knowing where those conflicts of interest are coming. It's all covering up the abuse of children. Now, we posted an article a few days ago warning about what the police in Britain were really about, a dangerous monster in waiting. But we'll just use that as a backdrop, because what we're interested in this is total policing with the Met Police. Because up until a few weeks ago, if you went to the Met Police website, under Yewtree, they were boasting that they were working in partnership with NSPCC. And we pointed out to the Met Police that this meant that there was no separation of powers. And we asked them a simple question. We said to the Met, what due diligence checks have you done to make sure that NSPCC itself is clean of people who would abuse children? You've got this charity embedded within the police Yewtree operation. What checks have you done? Well, we got a pretty good response, because the Met did not want to discuss this issue. So we were intrigued today that when we went looking for this mysterious Met NSPCC partnership on the Metropolitan Police website, we couldn't actually find it anymore. So have the police gone squeamish? Well, have a look at this. Thanks to angifanblogspot.co.uk, there's a very interesting article. I think Chris Spivey was behind this, so well done, Chris. But basically, he started to ask the NSPCC some questions in respect of its employment of a, quote, former terrorist called Hein Grosskopf. And this gentleman, despite not being qualified, he was registered as a social worker with the General Social Care Council and given a senior management post at the NSPCC. And the NSPCC employed him between 1999 and 2005 as a child protection officer. Now, he was moved under a cloud, apparently, from Blackburn branch of the NSPCC to become the manager of the Blackpool team. But what really interested us is that we understand that he worked for NSPCC Nottingham. So did the Metropolitan Police carry out any due diligence checks to see who they were climbing into bed with, or was the partnership designed to obscure investigations into child abuse? We'll leave it to the public to make a decision. But Mike, I can see your face that you might have something to say on that one.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it just goes on and on, doesn't it? I mean, it's just like the Dr. Barnardo's, the CEO, Javed Khan, who in January 2014 decided he had a bit of a land dispute in Pakistan, so he'd take himself off to Pakistan, hired an armed crew to take back what he thought was his land, and parts of buildings in the village. So these are criminal cartels running these charities. There's no doubt about it. I always say that predators always pick targets such as schools, hospitals, charities, if they want to be in at the root's end of covering up themselves. The NSPCC, I haven't got much to say about them apart from what the hell is it they do, same as Dr. Barnardo's. Considering the scale of CSA in this country at the moment, I'm just questioning what are these charities doing, because they don't seem to be providing much support. And if you speak to many of the victims, they haven't had no support at all.
Can I just cut?
Sorry, Brian.
If I can just cut in there, Mike. Melanie Shaw was on the telephone yesterday to NAPAC, one of the organisations that says it is specifically there to help adults who've suffered serious child sexual abuse. This is the second time I think that Melanie's spoken to them. Of course, she's got no help at all. And yesterday was classic because the chief executive of that organisation simply put the phone down on her. So we've got an organisation supported by a member of Parliament. I think Esther Ranson's one of the patrons as well.
Rancid.
When a real abuse victim comes forward and says, I need help, click, down goes the phone. So these are really bad times. I'm just watching the clock a bit, so I'll just give these last couple of slides here. But what is really building in this country, well, as you watch the Black Mariahs coming out of Downing Street, of course, all the glass blackened out, so the public can't actually see who is going in and out of number 10, number 11 Downing Street. This could be East Germany. Yes, I know it wasn't everybody in Germany. I'm simply using it. And we've got this site now, police, all black suited in the present day, carrying submachine guns behind metal gates. And what does this tell us? Well, it tells us how frightened our government is that people may wake up to the fact we're being run by criminals. And this is quite extraordinary. Westminster insiders, who have been talking to us for some weeks now, claim that Cameron's government is in bunker mentality, and they are saying very strongly that the British government is now run exclusively by Mr. Letwin and Francis Maude via the Cabinet Office, and no one else makes policy. So it doesn't matter what the other departments are, a very tight control through the Cabinet Office. We know that senior military officers are simply being ignored. The government doesn't want their opinion. And we have been hearing in the last couple of days that ministers themselves are being threatened to stick to the policy or else. Really nasty threats taking place. So we found it interesting that according to these insiders, there is just now a small cabal who are running the government. And of course, it was the UK column that first exposed that the political charity Common Purpose, with its Marxist links, was already well embedded in the British government. These are very dangerous times, Mike. What would you like to see the wider public do?
Well, what comforts me is throughout history, Brian, with any tyrannical regime, it's always overthrown. That's the one thing I comfort myself on. It's very clear to see that not only are the government running scared, but anyone tied in from the major financial industries, they're also running scared. You look at these multi-million-pound properties that they live in themselves. They're having to gate these properties, have extra security in, and more of these homes now are blocking themselves away from normal society with these gated premises and CCTV cameras. They're scared. And I tell you what, Brian, they should be scared. And I hope they are scared, because they themselves have made themselves prisoners. They're criminals, and they're doing everything they can to protect themselves. And we can see that clearly from number 10, the way that that's barricaded in now, all the way down to their personal homes. Well, I wouldn't want to live like that. I certainly wouldn't want to be them, Brian, because I tell you what, I think it won't be long that they're all in for a very big shock.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Let's just end on a rather poignant point, which we're anniversary of the Battle of the Somme back in in 1914. Millions dead, utterly betrayed now by David Cameron, of course, who's been giving away their country to a foreign power, a criminal foreign power, namely the European Union. So we just reflect on all those lives lost, and of course British soldiers who came back from the front were utterly betrayed by the government then, who promised them jobs, promised that the wounded would be looked after, which they weren't. Same old pattern. So there we are. Mike, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thanks, Wayne.
We will be putting out news flashes where we can on the situation at Tom Crawford's home. If you are able to go and support, of course, in a polite, reasonable way, please do, because the more people on the streets, the better. But if you can't attend, do something to put the pressure not only on the Chief Constable of Nottingham Police for his actions, but on David Cameron and his corrupt government for supporting criminal banks stealing people's property. Well, just a last message, a little bit of fun really, but I did say that I would mention a lady called Live for her interesting research into the origins of Bishop's Finger beer by Shepherd Neame. So I've been fascinated to find out what the signpost really meant, and thank you for doing that bit of research. So don't sit there feeling frightened about what's unfolding in Britain. It had to happen. What is important is the wider public wake up, start to support each other, and of course get the truth into the public professions such as the police. We need these people on the right side. Thanks for that. We'll be back 1 o'clock tomorrow, hopefully with David Scott, to give you Northern Exposure, his report from north of the border. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.